Hello, my name is Adam. Welcome to English Daily Progress. Today, I want to tell you about one of the most important changes in human history. A change that affects your life right now, even though it happened over 200 years ago. This change is called the Industrial Revolution. You have probably heard about it in school: factories, machines, steam engines, progress. But today, I want to tell you the story they do not usually teach, the human story. The story of what it felt like to live through this change. The story of people who thought they were being freed, but instead, they were being trapped in a new kind of prison. This is the story of Thomas, a real person, or rather a representation of millions of real people who left the countryside looking for freedom and found something very different. Let's begin.
The year was 1780. Thomas was born in a small village in England. His family had lived in this village for generations, hundreds of years. They were farmers, but they did not own the land. The land belonged to the local lord. Thomas's family rented the land. They grew crops, they raised animals, they worked from sunrise to sunset. It was hard work, very hard work, but it was their work. They controlled their own time. They decided when to plant, when to harvest, when to rest. Yes, they were poor. Yes, they owed rent to the Lord. Yes, life was difficult, but there was a kind of freedom in it. The freedom of working for yourself, the freedom of working with your family, the freedom of knowing your craft. Thomas learned farming from his father, who learned it from his father, who learned it from his father. Knowledge passed down through generations, skills that took a lifetime to master, understanding the soil, reading the weather, knowing when the time was right. This was a world that had existed for thousands of years, a world that seemed like it would last forever. But change was coming, big change, the kind of change that would destroy this world completely.
The invention that changed everything. In 1769, 11 years before Thomas was born, a man named James Watt made something incredible. He improved the steam engine. Now, steam engines had existed before, but they were not very good. They were slow, inefficient, and broke down often. But James Watt made them better, much better. His steam engine was powerful. It was reliable. It could do the work of many horses, or many men. This does not sound very exciting, I know. A better steam engine. So what? But this invention changed human history, because suddenly you did not need water to power machines. Before this, factories had to be built near rivers. The flowing water turned wheels. The wheels powered machines. But now, with steam engines, you could build a factory anywhere. You just needed coal to heat the water to make steam. And England had a lot of coal. The second thing that changed was cotton. England was importing cotton from its colonies, especially from India and later from America. Cotton was valuable. People wanted cotton clothes, but making cotton cloth by hand was slow, very slow. One person could make only a small amount per day. But then new machines were invented. The spinning jenny in 1764, the water frame in 1769, the power loom in 1785. These machines could do the work of dozens of people. They could spin thread faster. They could weave cloth faster. And when you combined these machines with steam engines, you had something revolutionary. Factories, buildings full of machines, powered by steam, producing cloth at incredible speed. And these factories needed workers, lots of workers. people to operate the machines, people to load the cotton, people to pack the cloth, people to work 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. And this is where Thomas's story really begins.
Thomas was 20 years old in 1800. He was married to Mary. They had a small baby, a daughter named Sarah. Life in the village was getting harder. The Lord had raised the rent. The harvests had been poor. Many families were struggling. Then one day, a man came to the village, a recruiter. He worked for a factory owner in Manchester. He gathered all the young men in the village square, and he made a speech about opportunity, about progress, about the future. Good men of this village, I come with news of great opportunity. In Manchester, there are factories, modern factories, where you can earn good wages, where you can work indoors, protected from the weather, where you do not depend on harvests or rain or landlords. You work, you get paid. Simple as that. A steady income every week, enough to feed your family, enough to save money, enough to build a better life. The old ways are dying. Farming is the past. Industry is the future. Come to Manchester. Be part of progress. Be free. Thomas listened to these words. His heart was beating fast. Freedom, a steady income. No more depending on the Lord, no more worrying about rain or drought. Just work and get paid. It sounded like a dream. He looked at Mary. She was worried. Leaving the village? Leaving everything they knew? Going to a city? But Thomas saw hope. Hope for a better life. Hope for little Sarah. Hope for freedom. That night, Thomas made his decision. They would go to Manchester. They would leave farming behind. They would join the modern world. They would be free. Or so he thought.
The journey to Manchester took 3 days. When they arrived, Thomas could not believe his eyes. The city was huge, bigger than anything he had ever seen. Buildings everywhere, tall buildings made of brick, chimneys everywhere, hundreds of chimneys, pouring black smoke into the sky. The sky itself was gray, not blue like in the village, gray from the smoke. The air smelled strange, like burning coal, like chemicals, like something unhealthy. The streets were crowded, so many people, more people in one street than in his entire village. Everyone rushing somewhere, everyone looking busy, everyone looking tired. Thomas, Mary, and baby Sarah found the factory. It was massive, 5 stories tall, windows on every floor, and the noise? Even from outside, Thomas could hear it. A constant rumbling, a mechanical roaring, the sound of machines. He went inside to meet the factory owner. The owner was a wealthy man, well-dressed, clean, very different from the recruiter, very different from the workers Thomas saw. The owner looked at Thomas. "Can you work hard?" "Yes, sir." "Can you follow instructions?" "Yes, sir." "Can you work 14 hours a day, 6 days a week?" Thomas hesitated. 14 hours? "Yes, sir." "Then you are hired. You will work in the spinning room. You will operate the spinning machines. You start tomorrow at 5 a.m. You finish at 8 p.m. 1 hour break for lunch. Wages are paid on Saturday. Do not be late. Do not damage the machines. Do not complain. If you cannot work, there are 100 men outside waiting for your job. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Thomas left the office. He should have felt excited. He had a job, a paying job. But something felt wrong. Something in the owner's voice, something in the way he spoke. Like Thomas was not a person,
like Thomas was just another machine.
Thomas woke up at 4 a.m., still dark outside. He walked to the factory. The streets were already full of workers, all walking the same direction, all silent, all tired. He entered the factory. The noise hit him like a wall. Machines everywhere, spinning, weaving, clattering, roaring. You could not think. You could not hear yourself. Just noise, constant noise. A supervisor showed Thomas his machine. You stand here. You feed the cotton here. You watch the thread here. If it breaks, you tie it. If the machine stops, you call me. Do not stop working. Do not sit down. Do not talk to other workers. Just work. And Thomas worked. He stood in front of the machine, hour after hour, feeding cotton, watching thread, tying breaks. His feet hurt. His back hurt. His ears hurt from the noise. The air was thick with cotton dust. He could barely breathe. By lunchtime, he was exhausted. But lunch was only 1 hour. Then, back to the machine, another 7 hours, standing, working, not thinking, just surviving. When the bell finally rang at 8 p.m., Thomas could barely walk. He went home to the small room they had rented, one room for the three of them. Dark, damp, crowded, very different from their cottage in the village. Mary looked at him. "How was it?" Thomas could not answer. He just collapsed on the bed and fell asleep immediately. This was his new life. This was freedom.
The reality of factory life. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Thomas learned the reality of factory life. It was not what the recruiter had promised. The wages were not good. They were barely enough to pay for rent and food. Nothing left to save. Nothing left for a better life. The work was not easier than farming. It was harder, much harder. Farming was hard on the body, but at least you could rest sometimes. You could sit under a tree. You could take a break when you needed. But in the factory, you could not stop. The machines did not stop, so you could not stop. If you stopped, you got yelled at. If you stopped again, you got fined. If you stopped a third time, you got fired. And there were always people waiting outside, desperate for your job. So you did not stop. The conditions were terrible. The factory was hot in summer, over 40 degrees inside. No ventilation, no fresh air, just heat and cotton dust. Workers fainted regularly. The factory was cold in winter. No heating except from the machines. Workers got sick, coughing, lung diseases from the dust. And the worst part? The children. Thomas saw children working in the factory. Children as young as 5 or 6 years old. Small children, Sarah's age. They worked under the machines, cleaning cotton scraps, tying broken threads, because their small fingers could do it quickly, and because they were cheap. Factory owners loved child workers. They paid them almost nothing, and children did not complain. Thomas watched these children, their tired faces, their small bodies bent over machines, and he felt sick. Is this progress? Is this the future? Is this freedom?
One night, Thomas could not sleep. He left the small room. He walked through the streets of Manchester. It was 2 a.m., but the factories were still running. The night shift, the chimneys still smoking, the machines still roaring. The factories never slept. Thomas sat on a bridge, looking at the dark river below. The river was black, polluted with factory waste, dead. And he thought about his old life, in the village. He thought about waking up with the sun, working in the fields, feeling the earth in his hands, seeing the sky, breathing clean air. He was poor then. He was under the Lord's control then. But at least he was outside. At least he controlled his own time. At least his work had meaning. He planted seeds. He harvested crops. He fed his family. But now, what did he do? He fed cotton into a machine. He watched thread spin for 14 hours a day, making cloth he could not afford to buy, making profits for someone else, making a factory owner rich. And Thomas realized something terrible. He had not escaped. He had just changed masters. Before, the Lord owned the land. Now, the factory owner owned the machine. Before, he paid rent with crops. Now, he paid rent with labor. Before, he was tied to the land. Now, he was tied to the factory. It was the same system, just different words. The recruiter had lied. This was not freedom. This was a new kind of slavery.
Let me explain what was really happening. What Thomas was experiencing was not unique to him. It was happening to millions of people, all across England, all across Europe, and later, all across the world. This was the Industrial Revolution. Between 1760 and 1840, human society changed more than it had in the previous 10,000 years. For 10,000 years, most people were farmers. They lived in villages. They grew their own food. They made their own clothes. They controlled their own time. Yes, most did not own their land. Yes, there were kings and lords and nobles. Yes, there was inequality. But the system was slow. It had existed for thousands of years, and it would have continued for thousands more. But then came the machines, and the machines changed everything. Suddenly, one machine could do the work of 50 people. Suddenly, factories could produce more in a day than a village could in a year. Suddenly, handmade goods could not compete with machine-made goods. So what happened? The craftsmen lost their jobs. The weavers who made cloth by hand could not compete with factories.
The blacksmiths could not compete with mass-produced metal goods. The shoemakers could not compete with factory-made shoes. One by one, the old crafts died, and the craftsmen had two choices: starve or go to the factories. Most went to the factories. Meanwhile, in the countryside, something else was happening: the Enclosure Acts. Rich landowners wanted more land for sheep. Why sheep? Because wool was valuable. Factories needed wool. So the landowners took common land, land that villagers had used for generations, for grazing animals, for growing food, for gathering wood. The landowners put fences around this land. They said, "This is private property now." Thousands of small farmers lost access to land. They could not survive in the villages anymore. So they had two choices: starve or go to the cities. Most went to the cities. This is called urbanization. In 1750, only 15% of English people lived in cities. By 1850, over 50% lived in cities. Millions of people moved, from farms to factories, from villages to cities, from fields to machines. And the factory owners became very rich, very, very rich, because the system was designed to make them rich. Think about it. The workers did all the work. They operated the machines 14 hours a day. They produced the cloth. They created the value.
But who got the profit? The factory owners. The workers got just enough to survive, just enough to come back tomorrow, just enough to not starve. But the owners got everything else: the profit, the wealth, the power. This system had a name: capitalism, and it was just beginning.
Thomas was not the only one who saw the problem. Many workers saw it, and some tried to resist. There was a movement called the Luddites, named after a man, possibly fictional, named Ned Ludd. The Luddites were workers who destroyed machines. They broke into factories at night. They smashed the machines with hammers. Why? Because they believed the machines were the problem. The machines took their jobs. The machines enslaved them. So they destroyed the machines. But it did not work. The factory owners just bought new machines, and the government made machine breaking a crime, punishable by death. Yes, death. You could be executed for breaking a machine, but not for exploiting workers, not for using child labor, not for creating terrible conditions. Those things were legal, but breaking a machine was a capital crime. Why? Because the government protected the factory owners. The government was made up of rich men, factory owners, landowners, businessmen. They made laws that protected their interests, not the workers' interests. The workers had no vote, no voice, no power, just labor to sell. Thomas heard about the Luddites. Part of him wanted to join them. Part of him wanted to fight back. But he had a family. If he was caught, he could be hanged. What would happen to Mary and Sarah? So he did what millions of others did. He kept working. He kept quiet. He survived. Because there was no other choice.
The worst part of the Industrial Revolution was what happened to children. Children like Thomas's daughter, Sarah. When Sarah turned 6 years old, the factory owner came to Thomas. "Your daughter is old enough to work now. Bring her tomorrow." Thomas felt his heart stop. "No, she is too young." The owner looked at him coldly. "You need the money, do you not? Your wages alone are not enough. She will earn a few pennies per day. Every penny helps. Bring her tomorrow." That night, Thomas held Sarah. She was so small, so innocent. He remembered his childhood in the village, playing in the fields, helping his father with simple tasks, learning slowly, naturally. But Sarah would not have that childhood. She would grow up in the factory, in the noise, the dust, the darkness, and there was nothing he could do about it. The next morning, he took her to the factory. She was terrified. The noise scared her. The machines scared her. But the supervisor put her to work, under the machines, crawling in small spaces, cleaning, tying threads, dangerous work. Children died in factories, regularly, crushed by machines, suffocated by dust, exhausted to death. But nobody cared. There were always more children. Poor families needed the money, so they sent their children to work. 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old. Childhoods stolen, futures destroyed. All for profit, all for progress, all for the Industrial Revolution.
20 years passed. Thomas was now 40 years old. He looked like he was 60. His body was broken. His lungs were damaged from cotton dust. His back was bent from standing. His hands were scarred from the machines. Mary had died 2 years earlier, from a lung disease, from the factory air. Sarah was 21 now. She still worked in the factory. She had never known any other life. She had never played in fields. She had never felt truly free. She was born into this system, and she would die in this system. Thomas sometimes thought about the village. He wondered if it still existed. He wondered if anyone still farmed there. Probably not. The old world was gone. The machines had won. One evening, Thomas was walking home from the factory. He saw a poster on a wall. It showed a drawing of a factory with workers lined up. The words said, "Progress, employment, prosperity." Thomas stared at this poster and he laughed, a bitter laugh. Progress? For whom? For the factory owners getting rich? Employment? You mean slavery with wages? Prosperity? He looked at his worn clothes, his thin body, his exhausted face. This was prosperity? He remembered the recruiter's speech 20 years ago. Freedom, the man had said. A better life. All lies. The factory did not give freedom. It took freedom away. The only freedom Thomas had now was the freedom to work or starve. That was the choice. Work in the factory or die. Some freedom.
This is the story they do not usually tell about the Industrial Revolution. In school, you learn about inventions, steam engines, factories, railways. You learn about progress, about how production increased, about how England became powerful, about how the modern world was born. And all of that is true. The Industrial Revolution did create the modern world. It did increase production. It did lead to technological progress. But there is another side, the human side. The side of millions of people like Thomas, who were told they were being freed, but who were really being enslaved in a new way. Yes, they were no longer tied to the land, but now they were tied to the machine. Yes, they were no longer under lords, but now they were under factory owners. Yes, the system had changed, but the exploitation had not. It just had a new name. And here is the most important part. This system did not end. It evolved. It spread. It became global. Today, right now, this system is still here. You might not work in a factory, but you work for someone else. You sell your labor. You get paid just enough to survive, just enough to come back tomorrow, while someone else gets the profit. The factory owners of 1800 became the corporations of 2000. The machines of 1800 became the computers of 2000. The exploitation of 1800 is still the exploitation of today, just with better branding. They do not call you a factory worker anymore. They call you an employee. They do not call it exploitation anymore. They call it employment. They do not call it slavery anymore. They call it a career. But the structure is the same. You work, someone else profits, and you are told to be grateful, told to feel lucky, told that this is freedom.
Thomas died at age 47. His body could not take any more. The factory had used him up, like it used up millions of others. He was buried in a cheap grave. No ceremony, no monument, just another worker, forgotten, replaced. But his story is not unique. His story is the story of the Industrial Revolution, the real story, not the story of progress and innovation, but the story of human cost, the story of people who thought they were being freed, but who were being trapped, the story of a system that promised prosperity, but delivered exploitation. And this story matters, because it is still happening. Right now, in different forms, in different places, but the same structure. My name is Adam, and I told you this story not to make you depressed, but to make you aware, to make you see the system, to make you understand that freedom is not given, it is taken. Thomas never got his freedom. He died still trapped. But you are alive. You can see the system. You can understand it. And maybe, just maybe, you can find a way to truly be free. Not the freedom they sell you, the freedom you create. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to English Daily Progress for more stories that challenge you to see the world differently. Leave a comment and tell me, do you see the connection between 1800 and today, between factories and offices, between Thomas and you? I read every comment. And remember, progress is not the same as freedom. Technology is not the same as liberation. A wage is not the same as independence. Think about it. See you in the next video. This is Adam, signing off.